Pre-warned, I'm about to geek out. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. On this channel we post writing tips, unboxings, book hauls, book reviews and the occasional vlog, and today is another book review. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. If you want to see it as soon as I upload, click that little bell down below, because the book we're going to do today is a Terry Pratchett and it is Witches Abroad. Me and Matt are huge Pratchett fans. It's sort of one of the things we clicked on when we met. I've been trying to read the Discworld in order. Before I went abroad I was reading a random book, a Pratchett book, a random book, a Pratchett book, and doing it like that. But then we spent 6 years teaching abroad, so obviously I fell behind on my Pratchett's because I knew I had them all in book form and I didn't want to have to buy more on Kindle because I get so bored of Kindles. I kind of didn't read them for a while, and finally I'm starting to get back into my routine of reading a Pratchett in between books until I finished Discworld, and I was up to Witches Abroad.
Everything starts somewhere, although many physicists disagree. There is the constant desire to find out where. Where is the point where it all began? But much later than that, the Discworld was formed. Drifting onwards through space, atop 4 elephants, on the shell of a giant turtle, the great Artuin.
And so that is the Discworld. It is a flat, circular earth that sits atop 3 elephants that ride atop of the great Artuin who swims through space. What he's looking for, no one's quite sure, but he's swimming anyway. And the witches on the Discworld are a group of women who are so hilarious and have such distinct characteristics. They're basically extreme versions of people that you probably know. Pratchett has always based his characters on what he sees, such as in the very first Discworld books with Luggage, who is a big trunk with loads of little legs, and that was based on watching people trying to pull their suitcases through Bath's cobbled streets and how they just look unwieldy and frustrating, and he always thought, well, if they had legs that would be useful. The witches are basically like that. There are 2 types of magic. There are the wizards and there are the witches, and the difference is the wizards live in the Unseen University in the middle of Ankh-Morpork, which is the city of Discworld, and they do experiments and generally cause a lot of mayhem, and the witches basically call it not useful magic, and the witches' magic is useful magic, such as how to heal people, how to make foods and all those kind of things. So 2 different types of magic, both respect each other and understand the need for both of the magics. I have taken so many quotes for this, and normally I would say that I would read you guys the blurb, but Discworld is so well known and this is a newer version of the books. I mean, I can show you the bookshelf. This book was first published in 1991, which is the year I was born, and this is like at least the 10th edition of this style of the book. They haven't even bothered with a blurb. Let me sum it up for you. Witches Abroad is a story of 3 witches: Magrat, Granny Weatherwax, and Nanny Og. And of course the cat Grebo. The fairy godmother, Desiderata, has died and she passes on her fairy godmother wand to Magrat. Fairy godmother wands are very rare, and Nanny Og and Granny Weatherwax want to go and find it because they know she has it, but then Magrat walks in and she has it. When she died, Desiderata left a message for Magrat, which was to go to Genua and to stop the girl marrying the prince. And under no circumstances to take anyone else with her. Which of course means Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Ogg are going to go with her. And it is the story of them travelling. Now these witches have never left their homes. Why would they? They like them, they control the townspeople, it's great. They leave their homes and it's basically Brits abroad. It is the stereotypical, all the different types of Brits you get abroad and the ridiculous things that they get up to, particularly with alcohol. And then the end, getting to Genoa and trying to stop the princess from marrying the prince. I won't tell you too much about that because if you haven't read this, you're gonna find some interesting things. This book mashes together lots of fairy tales because it is about fairy godmothering. Pratchett basically goes through different fairy tales and different countries, mashes them together and does a whole Pratchett sarcastic spin on the entire experience, which if you're a Terry Pratchett fan is what you want. And the best thing is, death is still in this book. And as we all know, Death is the best character ever. On page 4, this is not a spoiler, I wanted to share this with you because it basically sums up what this story is about as well. This is a story about stories, or what it really means to be a fairy godmother, but it's also particularly about reflections and mirrors. All across the multiverse, there are backward tribes, considered backward that is by people who wear more clothes than they do, who distrust mirrors and images because they say they steal a bit of a person's soul and there's only so much of a person to go around. And the people who wear more clothes say this is just superstition, despite the fact that other people who spend their lives appearing in images of one sort or another seem to develop a thin quality. It's put down to overwork and tellingly overexposure instead. Does that not sum up what this book is about quite well? And also, are you enjoying my soul? On page 6, this is quite possibly some of the best worldly advice that you can get. It is the advice from Desirata Hollow's grandmother, and that is, never trust a dog with orange eyebrows. Always get the young man's name and address. Never get between two mirrors. Obviously you have, why would a dog have orange eyebrows? Then you have, always get a young man's name and address, which is very sound advice, people. And then never get between two mirrors, which links into the story. Everything pulls you into the storyline. On page 12, when the villain of the story is introduced, Pratchett shows that they are the villain instantly by having them look into a mirror. The amount of foreshadowing that he does, everything you can see happen. As soon as it happens, you realize just how much he has been telling you up to that point. And the fact that all the way through the start of this book has been like, mirrors are bad, never get between two mirrors, mirrors are terrible for godmothers. And then the villain instantly is in front of the mirror. You instantly know, there's no going back from that. On page 61, there is a really good bit of foreshadowing, which is she'd made a man of him after all. Now at this point you don't know what they're talking about, but I know now, and it is very good foreshadowing. You will enjoy trying to work out what that foreshadows. It also stays true to the fact that Pratchett calls this a story about stories, and it always sticks to very traditional, quite cliche and stereotypical story types, such as there are always three, the young, the old, and that one. I mean, hocus pocus. You have the young, the old, and that one. There's always three. Things come in threes. There is even the rule of three when you decorate, just three. And Pratchett just draws your attention to this. By reading Pratchett, you're basically learning all the tricks of writing stories without him actually trying to tell you any of those tricks. He just does them all in such a way that you can find them and go, ah, so true. And he takes the mick out of them the entire time he uses them. Fantastic! On page 84, as always on Discworld, which was right on the very edge of unreality, little bits of realness crept in whenever someone's mind was resonating properly. This quote is from when the witches are flying and they're creating broomstick planes and thinking of names for airlines. One of which was, we could call it Ver and it stops. Obviously they're referring to Virgin Airways, but they're also referring to Magrat's virginity, which they do like to take the mick of, especially Nanny Ogg, who we know has a past. I'm gonna say spoiler alert, not necessarily because I'm gonna tell you the plot, because I don't want to tell you really specifically, but because the quotes are getting more about what happens in the story and they're such funny ones. I don't want you guys to get them from me if you haven't read the book. If you haven't read the book and you don't want to hear some of these funny lines and know some of the little bits that come in the story, then go to this time here where I will go to my overall review. If you do want to see those spoilers, or you have already read the book, then stay tuned. Spoiler alert. Alright, page 88. Granny is drinking absinthe. she's drinking it rather quickly. I hate reading books in normal modern day life. I just don't like it because I think I read to escape. And yet I really love the bits of real life that Pratchett brings into his work because they're the bits of life which are hilarious, such as seeing people or drinking absinthe yourself. On page 163, you can see another one of the foreshadowing. So at the start, you remember how I said Desiderata left a letter saying do not bring those two. And on page 163, it says, it crossed her mind that Desiderata had been very lax on that point. The one thing you could be sure of is if you told Granny Weatherwax and Nanny Ogg not to help, was that they would rush to help. And it's so true. That's exactly what they would do. And it foreshadows that that was her plan all along. Because when you know people that well, you can reverse psychology them, and so many of Pratchett's characters use reverse psychology all the way through. I just love it. I also adore how Pratchett shows you what the characters are doing without actually telling you what the characters are doing. An example of this is on page 160 when Nanny Ogg gets up to go to the bar. Now, this whole time, Magrat and Granny Weatherwax are having a conversation. They're talking, and that is what you are focusing on. But there are little snippets of what's going on in the background. And those snippets are that Nanny Ogg stands up and she looks at the queue and she takes a pin out of her hat. The conversation continues, and the next thing is that you can hear complaints coming from the bar. And then Nanny appears with drinks. You can vividly see that Nanny Ogg is going through the group of people at the bar and stabbing them with a pin to get to the front of the queue without Pratchett actually telling you any of that. All you know is that Nanny Ogg has got up, gone to the bar, and she has a pin. That's all you know. And yet you fill in the blanks. Beautiful, perfect writing. This might be an unpopular opinion, but Witches Abroad kind of reminds me of The Colour of Magic, but it's The Colour of Magic almost rewritten when people know the world a little more. So The Colour of Magic was Pratchett's first Discworld book, and it gets a lot of ridicule because it is basically a tour of the Discworld, and it doesn't have a very good plot. You're basically following Rincewind, luggage and that, and looking at the world. And I still find it very funny, but it doesn't have a plot. Witches Abroad is almost like he's rewritten The Colour of Magic where you're touring the Discworld with the witches, but he's actually put a plot in and fixed the faults from that first book, which was really good to see. All the way through Discworld, you can definitely see Pratchett developing as a writer, and it's to the point where his last books that he wrote before he died are very, very poignant, because also he goes from very light-hearted humour to really digging at society, because all of his books in some way or another are actually trying to correct society and saying what's wrong with it. Every single one is fighting something, which is also why he's one of the only male writers who won the Women's Literary Award for writing good female characters and well-rounded female characters, because he doesn't agree with the world that was around him. And in his world, he was trying to fix it by taking the piss out of it. So if you actually read them, you'll see this happening. Page 308. If you've read Pratchett before, the thank you quote is all I need to say because it is written in capitals. And if you read Pratchett, you know exactly what character that is and who they are and what they're there for. And that foreshadows everything and creates a joke and is generally amazing. How many writers can you say have managed to create a character where it doesn't even matter what sentence that character is saying? You know instantly from the font who that character is. Pratchett is the only writer I can think of who's actually managed that, and in such a simplistic way. For anyone who hasn't read Pratchett, Death will always speak in full capitals. No other character will do this, and Death will only do this. So it doesn't matter what Death is saying, it doesn't matter what is in the room, it doesn't matter what Pratchett describes. He doesn't even tell you Death is there, but you know it's Death because it's in capitals. And Death is one of the most beloved Terry Pratchett characters. He is amazing. And when Pratchett died, if you didn't read Pratchett books and you saw all of those memes of Pratchett playing chess with Death and things like that, it wasn't a morbid thing. Death is seriously who every Pratchett lover probably wants to meet. If Death is not like the Death from Pratchett, I'm going to be thoroughly disappointed. This is to the point because my mum is also a Pratchett fan. My sister, actually, I'm not sure if she reads them that much. Nicole, do you read Pratchett? You know of Pratchett. But we have made an agreement between the three of us that whoever dies first, the other two have to come dressed as Death from Terry Pratchett. That is a rule. And if anyone complains at the funeral, I can just yell at them in Death voice. Because Witches Abroad is a later one in the Discworld as well, None of it is explained to the reader at this point. Pratchett does not explain to anyone that that is death at all. You either know it or you don't, which is another thing about reading Pratchett. You click into it and you really do become a Pratchett nerd, because the more you read, the more you will notice in his books. Which is why when I lent Jazz over at Red Panda Reads, I lent her Mort, because it's the first book that Death properly appears in. It's the first one I really enjoyed. I want her to get the jokes if she does get into Pratchett. If she doesn't, I understand. Sort of. But that's why I gave her that book, so she can witness Death and go on from there. If you haven't seen the book swap I did with Jazz, the link is above this video and I'll put a link below as well. It was so fun swapping books with Jazz, and thank you so much for collaborating with me on that. Alright, I only have 2 more quotes left, guys, I promise. I seriously couldn't stop writing quotes when I read this. On page 213 and 214, Grebo's transformation description is just beautiful. So Grebo, this is an evil cat. It is terrifying. Everyone is scared of it. It beats up everyone. It's fantastic. I love Grebo. All the way through this book, I mean, Grebo has literally killed a vampire in this book. It has fought everything. It is fantastic. And Grebo turns human. Can you imagine Grebo as a human? It is, oh, it is wonderful. It is such a wonderful thing to behold. And the description of Grebo transforming. Through the pathways of his feline brain surged a tide of belief. He suddenly believed he was human. He wasn't simply under the impression that he was human. He believed it implicitly. The sheer force of this unshakable belief flowed out into his morphic field, overriding its objections, rewriting the very blueprint of his self. Fresh instructions surged back. If he was human, he didn't need all this fur, and he ought to be bigger. The witches watched, fascinated. I never thought we'd do it, said Granny. No points on the ears, the whiskers were too long. He needed more muscle, all these bones were the wrong shape, these legs ought to be longer. And then it was finished. Grebo unfolded himself and stood up, a little unsteadily. Nanny stared, her mouth open. Then her eyes moved downwards. "Caw," she said. "I think," said Granny Weatherwax, "that we'd better imagine some clothes on him right now." That was easy enough. When Grebo had been clothed to his satisfaction, Granny nodded and stood back. "Magrat, you can open your eyes now," she said. "I hadn't got them closed." "You should have had." Grebo turned slowly, a faint, lazy smile on his scarred face. As a human, his nose was broken and a black patch covered his bad eye, but the other one glittered like the sins of angels, and his smile was the downfall of saints. Female ones, anyway. I just love Grebo because not only has he become basically a very attractive, very naughty human, later on he still follows his cat-like features and still wants to get in a fight and then find someone to have sex with after. That is what Grebo does, and that's exactly what human Grebo wants to do. On page 215, I just want to say, read this page, because Grebo as a human bounces the coachman, who is a mouse as a human, like a mouse, like he's playing with a mouse as a cat. And just that imagery, it's such a beautiful, beautiful sight. Alright, and that is everything I think I want to say. Ultimately, I think everyone should read Pratchett. Even if you don't become a Pratchett fan and don't want to read loads more, that's fine. But you should definitely at least read one. The one that most people recommend is The Night's Watch. That's where a lot of people start on Discworld and Pratchett. I love everything with Death in. I would always recommend Mort, Reaper Man, and Pyramids. I adored, because it's the Assassin's Guild and I adore assassins. But wherever you start, just give it a try, because he has such a unique way of writing, and it's just good to witness that, even if it is not your thing. So all in all, I would give this book, of course, a 10 out of 10, because it is Pratchett and I'm a Pratchett nerd, and that will never change. Sorry, not sorry. And thank you guys so much for watching. If you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you want to see as soon as I upload, click that little bell down below. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Tumblr. I post around bookish pictures, as well as my writing tips and unboxings on there. If you guys are interested in more Discworld, I am definitely going to be reading more in the future. Please comment down below if there's anything in particular you want me to read or anything that you would like me to discuss with Discworld. Matt is also a massive nerd of Discworld, so we like to talk about it, so please comment below, let me know. And thanks for watching, guys. Bye!